So, hi, Michael. Welcome. This is
Thank
just
you.
the second of this series. I'm kind of calling it Talking Therapy, just chatting to a few therapists in a kind of casual way. And yeah, it'd be lovely just for you just to introduce yourself and just say a little bit what you do and how you got to be in the position you now are.
Well, I'm 60 years old. I'm a therapist, a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Washington in the U.S. Um, I've how did I become a therapist? Well, I was very difficult early life. Won't necessarily get into that right now. From the age of 20 to 30, practicing alcoholic. Sort of arrested growth during that period. Found sobriety when I was married with 3 kids. Found sobriety. Very intellectually oriented. So I started reading a lot of books, trying to figure it out. And that is how, when my character tries to understand and figures it out. And so I was making small progress from 30 to 40. Family dynamics were very challenging. And so at 40, I had my oldest son was in quite a crisis, and I decided to do something which was pretty radical for my family, is make a counseling appointment. I had no history in my family, had no real belief about counseling. It was almost a desperate move. And I made an appointment with a family therapist. And my wife and my son occasionally, but my first wife, went along with me. And I was very much unable to interact constructively with my first wife because of lack of sense of self, etc. And what I saw happen was the therapist was able to see my rageful wife, who I experienced as annihilating almost. I've experienced it just casually. It was, quietly, just by some invisible, it seemed to me, manner, was able, to handle and keep her self-possession even in front of my wife. That just totally fascinated me. That blew my mind. And so in the waiting room on one of the visits, I looked at her wall and she had a diploma from a marriage and family therapy program. And I said, that's interesting. I've never heard about that. So 2 things happened. I ended up separating from my wife, but then I also ended up reading a great deal about family therapy, Jay Haley, and the systematic approach. And of course, to my sort of intellectual mind, that was very fascinating. And I was working full-time as a registered nurse in the hospital at that time. In fact, continued to work until just a few months ago as a day job. So one day, I was living by myself, because I was separated, losing my kids. I had the idea, it was just, wow, I could become a therapist, So I started a long process, actually, academic part-time, going back and getting, in our system, a bachelor's degree, and then getting a master's degree, and then long apprenticeship, because there is no built-in system. So you just got to kind of do things for free for quite a while to become a licensed therapist. So that's when I began. And so I was trying to practice from family therapy point of view. So I was explaining to people how everything they were suffering from made sense in the family system's point of view. And it did all fit together and made sense, and it was brilliant. I don't think it helped people very much. just talking to somebody. Meanwhile, I became interested in the idea of narcissism and borderline traits. Sort of that psychology, I'm trying to learn all this bunch of psychology so I could help people and help myself. And I went on Amazon and saw Alexander Lowen's book, Narcissism. And I read some of the reviews, and the review says, there's some good stuff about narcissism here, but all this bioenergetic stuff, total hooey, just ignore it. Which was kind of like bait. I couldn't resist it. So I did get the book, and I thought, well, there is some good information on narcissism here, though it's a different perspective than many other authors. And the body stuff just was baffling. It just was baffling. I couldn't understand, talking about energy, talking about feeling, talking, it was really baffling. But it left curious questions, left some questions back in my mind. It left some curiosity. So not wanting to invest much into it, I actually just saw if the Seattle Library had any Alexander Lowen books that were, a little bit more about this bioenergetic hooey. And they did have one book. It was Betrayal of the Body. And so I ordered it, and when it was ready for pickup, I picked it up. I brought it home, and like I do, I opened the page at random. And the page I happened to open was a page that described sort of the physical presentation of the schizoid character. And that was a life-changing event because I had these physical aspects, and I thought they were just accumulation of bad luck. That was misfortune. It was physical misfortune, lack of balance. And, him explain, one, I'm not alone. Challenge to my feeling of specialness, but also great hope. And that he recognized me and described me, and like nowhere else did I find a description of that. Like nowhere. You read self-help literature, you talk about people that are having trouble, that people are struggling with this or struggling with that, or even, in physical training and conditioning, literature, people talk about struggling with this or struggling with that, but they didn't put it together in that way. So I was just fascinated. However, it was a bit of a shock to my system. So I put it away for about 6 weeks. And then I read it, and that began my gradual foray into Lowen's books. So it was actually doing my apprenticeship. I was a practicing therapist, trying to practice from the family therapy point of view, and also, but taking in all these ideas, which were so different. And I was having a cognitive dissonance, or, like a certain crisis, because I said, I think this is so much more important, so much more valuable, so much more useful to my clients, but I don't know exactly how to bring it. It's like it was almost feeling like I was holding back. Although my understanding was, very hard to get the whole piece, so many things were making sense, but it was hard to get the whole piece. Actually, what happened is I was dating a little. It was very difficult for me to look for relationships, but I met a wonderful woman, a very fantastic woman who I'm married to now, have been, and sort of just blew me to pieces. That having desire like that, or of course there was a dysfunctional aspect to it, my fusion, but great desire, and I started shaking and everything like that. So I decided I'm going to get some of this type of therapy. And there wasn't much available even in Seattle, but there was a wonderful, my first therapist, Neil Reichian, sort of a hybrid between a Reichian approach and bioenergetics. Took me on and had 2 years of therapy, starting very slowly. It had sort of the laying down work, working with the eyes and the breathing from the Reichian approach, and it also had some of the grounding and standing up and being brought to standing up position, the Loanium approach. Very gentle, and that was my start. That was my start. There was no training available anywhere nearby, so I was in the Florida group for 3 years. I found that very interesting, wonderful bunch of people, but what they were doing wasn't matching what Lowen described in his books.
Mm-hmm.
He was closer than anyone else, I think, and I also spent a little bit talked to Southern California training program, bioenergetic training program, and they definitely had moved away so much. Basically it seemed unrecognizable. Their point of view was basically good psychodynamic therapy with maybe shaking your legs out a little bit, in the beginning. So I sort of reinvested myself in more, self-taught, So I'm self-taught from the books. That's not an optimal situation, and obviously, there's going to be gaps, there's been blind spots. I am right now actually doing some core energetics. I'm actually in a training program there. I think more to find a community than to, change my perspective. But of course, that was an open mind. Core energetics is offshoot that came from John Parakos, who worked with Lowen. And Parakos was a little bit more spiritually minded. Mm-hmm. And he wanted to, now we're actually getting off how I became a therapist, but that's how I became a therapist. That's how I got into this field. In a way, I feel like it saved my life and gave my life back, but there is no finish line.
No. So what do you kind of, with your daily therapeutic work now, how does it kind of look for you? What's it like?
You mean my personal work that I do?
Well, yeah, as a therapist, basically, what kind of, how is it for you at the moment? How do you work mostly with people and find clients or?
So I occasionally get someone who comes looking for bioenergetics, and which is a small number, and a small number of them have actually done something like bioenergetics. And maybe they're looking for something like accountability or a little help with self-analysis. And in that case, I always emphasize with all my clients when they're getting I call it the CEO of their change process. And that this is a daily thing, that just to be, practices, to be integrated into your life, because if we just meet every week or twice a month and just, talk about what's hard, not much change is going to happen. It is hard, but I'll have something more to say about that. But I would say that most of my clients they're in the tech industry, which means they have good insurance. So the money isn't an issue. But it's such a different perspective that I spend a lot of time orienting, doing some light grounding, what I call the basic two, the bow and the forward arch position. Call it just introducing that a little bit, introducing the idea of self-awareness, perceiving the body from the inside versus looking at it critically from sort of a dissociated outside self-conscious point of view. And that's actually quite a lot of work. And it's many people don't really get too deep. You know, most of the clients are looking for a little tweak. They want to keep what they're doing and have a little bit of a tweak to become, effective, and I think, bioenergetics is more like, well, no, not only do you have mistaken goals, but you got to change your body, which is a strong message. However tactfully you might deliver it, it's just,
Yeah. I mean, I've noticed over the years how many, I think it's kind of actually more just in the brain. It's kind of hardwired to seek simple solutions, and, almost in the same way we always want to find the bad guy. There's a problem, we try and make it like a James Bond movie or something, and we're going to defeat the bad guy. And so I certainly noticed a lot of people would come when my YouTube channel started to take off. What is the one thing I can do that's going to kind of change my life, without me having to commit too much of my own energy or really commit my own emotionality into it. But then I don't know, I guess I tried to turn that around a little bit and just, to not, something I learned when I was running groups for about a decade was I saw other group leaders would often get a lot of drama in the group room. And I would never really get much drama. But in the case of sort of clients, participants, basically, getting the hump with the process, not being happy with it and whatever, and, not wanting to continue. And when I would chat to the therapists who were getting these kinds of situations, I saw, well, my own opinion was that they weren't really, how I kind of saw it was, they weren't really putting it out in advance that this was going to be challenging or something. It was a little bit more, some I knew would give the workshops quite what I considered floaty or fluffy names. And then they'd have participants there, doing Dan Casrael bonding technique, flushing technique and stuff like this, really intense cathartic process work. And then a lot of the clients, the customers participants would get, kind of freaked out and it was too much and whatever. And so what I kind of chose to do was just tell people this is really going to be challenging, and then this is when okay, if you're in a crisis and you need to take some real action, then come to this workshop if you're ready to, I don't know, just looking for a way to kind of change that dynamic around and try not to attract so many people who kind of wanted quick fixes in a way, and that, I don't know, that seems to have worked quite well for me. Though for a long time I became a bit too much of a tough guy with it somewhere, and there was a lot of grounding work, but not really enough heart-centered work. A lot of kind of, and that was a bit of an issue at some point. I felt that I kind of was a bit concerned: is where am I kind of leading people, and and people just wanting to be stronger, really, as still in a kind of defensive mode. Of not really overcoming the earlier wounds, and so I had to introduce a bit more vulnerability into my own being and also into how I was presenting the work. But it was not just about becoming stronger, clearer, more aware, but also being more heartful, being able to speak about what's on your heart, being able to, relate properly with other people. So yeah, I'm not quite sure why I started saying that, but that was kind of that's worked for me. But I mean, I haven't really been able to run many groups for quite a while now, and with the lockdown and stuff, so I've got to look a little bit how it all starts again and all of that. Have you been affected a lot by the last year of COVID? I don't know how it is in Seattle.
Yeah, I was in an office doing, and almost everybody there, of course, when it started, I thought it might be 3 weeks. I think I canceled my appointments for 10 days. And I was thinking, oh, boy, I'm going to, And then I thought I might be back, and it turned out to be a whole year. So, I knew nothing about Zoom or video chat, and that restarted that. So basically, um, though I have had some contact with all the clients that were coming in person, only like a couple eventually rejoined in Zoom, and I've been in contact with a lot. And they're still waiting, and some people are still waiting. So from a business model and revenue models and number of sessions model has made a difference. But I think the biggest difference, of course, is in the delivery, over Zoom versus, you know, in person. About clients, just wanting that little tweak. Um, uh, I would say most of the people come to me, and this maybe, just the nature of our society are doers. They want to do, and they want to find the thing to do. Okay, I haven't found the right thing to do. Just tell me the right thing to do, and I'll do it. And of course, that's the problem. The emphasis on doing and not being is part of the problem. But as I tell clients, as I tell people, as I tell myself, the real shift, the real work is shifting from a performance paradigm to a self-expression paradigm.
Mm.
And that's baffling. And there's going to be a desert in between. And I think that's what I experienced. However modest results you may be getting from performing, when you stop, you're going to get like no results. It's like even worse to stop if you become disillusioned with doing, the idea of accomplishment, the idea of esteem of your colleagues, or even material comforts, if that's the goal you're going for. And because expression has been so repressed for some characters, or expression has been so undeveloped for other characters, you're not going to get the satisfaction, the pleasure, the tension, charge, discharge, release from expression. You're not going to be able to produce that. So it's going to be, so, before it gets better, it gets real. And that's kind of clinically why I think we're looking for I think my own story and a few clients that I really know of, or people that I know of, that was the case. It didn't really get better. They weren't happier. They didn't feel a greater sense of ease right away, but they felt more real. And there's psychological part of that. And there's, the physical grounding part of it is really about becoming more real, and facing reality. And so it's a paradox in therapy, because to do anything different, they need to use their will to perform and exercise. So yes, there is a paradox here, because you got to put some will, because if nothing changes, nothing changes. So do something different, but then at the same time, you've got to lose that attachment to outcome, and bring in curiosity,
Mm.
and what will change your life is a different experience. So I tell them, you're not looking for an accomplishment. You're looking for a different experience. And, constant self-analysis and rumination and talking to some will give perspective on your past experience, but it won't provide new experience. What you're looking for is new experience. And that's why you really, talking about changing your body, or changing your emotion, or changing your expression, which will then change your interactions with other beings, change that experience. And it is tricky, because most, there's basic core of all therapy. I think even if you don't call it cognitive behavioral therapy, that you're doing some cognitive behavioral therapy. We're using our intellects to decide what's the best thing to do, and then we're using, our choice or willpower, to do it and try to get something different. And I think the basic idea behind cognitive behavioral core of therapy is if you do something different, you'll have different results. And that will sustain a change. But what I think Reich and Lowen really said, you can have different results, but not have a different experience. Like Albert Ellis tells a story that's, relational, emotional, behavioral therapy or something like that. Albert Ellis, real hardcore cognitive behavioral guy, where he was feeling lonely. So he went to the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens and deciding to ask 100 women for a date. It was just a numbers game, right? And so you just have to do something. If you're lonely and not asking anybody out, then you're going to stay lonely. But if you ask people out, but what never included in that story is, did he enjoy the dates? Does the dates enjoy it and radiate back the enjoyment to him? So you could force yourself to, and this is a common goal. Many of the young tech workers, you could force yourself to approach women more, but you could still feel like a loser, even if some of them are saying, "Yeah, I'll go to the boat races with you." You can have different results and still feel the same, and so not have a different experience. And that's why often, because it's the only way of having common ground, I sort of do some cognitive behavioral work, some practical problem solving, in the present day, and think, and there's often the feeling, okay, I got some great ideas now. In fact, I wrote it down. This is what I'm going to do. I've got the piece I can perform. And then it doesn't change things, and they can't sustain the performance. And then maybe they come back, and then you say, well, that's what the body work is about. So there's a lot of pre-work before really even getting into body work, I find, with people.
I mean, I definitely relate to what you're saying. I think you articulate it very well. I mean, I've personally noticed, I don't know, I'm by no means any kind of expert on the history of clinical psychology, but it seemed just as, I don't remember, American presidents were talking about the decade of the brain or the decade of the mind, like a few decades ago or something. And therapy went through its whole kind of thing as well, with the emergence of CBT and NLP and things, where it seemed as though if we could just fiddle around with how we were framing situations, I don't mean fiddle around in a pejorative way, alter how we're framing situations and, look at how we're using self-belief in situations that meet us, then, a huge, in fact, complete level of change could occur, on a kind of core psychological level. But I think what has happened in the last decade in particular is that people have begun to realize that this is way too mechanistic an approach, and it doesn't really quite work for most people. For most people, it doesn't work, or it's of limited effectiveness. I mean, I have personally found CBT quite useful, working with some of my own anger when I was younger, and learning to reframe situations and stop myself from when my mind is just queuing up to kind of get into explode mode, and to change that. But I think, and I'm heartened. I mean, I'm currently running this kind of online training and a long online series of 52-week course, and there's quite a lot of other therapists on there, many of whom are a great deal more qualified than me, who are working in mainstream psychology or counseling, and are just, they want to know, well, how can you bring more body stuff in, and I think a lot of people are increasingly aware that you can't just kind of work it all out with this. It doesn't quite work. And it is good to have new experiences, and it is good to think differently about yourself, particularly if you've always put yourself down and gone for second best or whatever. Those things are good, but they are not, a complete package, so to speak, therapeutically. And I mean, I mean, just as things go good, things also kind of go bad with COVID and separation and whatever. But I do perceive that there's a growing awareness in psychology that we need a bit more body stuff, but it's left to the few kind of people in that field who will jump and do something by someone like me who's got no PhD in anything at all, or you know, because as you said, I think somewhere just a little earlier, it's very hard. Okay, so you suddenly think, I'm really into this body stuff, or I've read something by Lowen or whoever, and I really want to do something like this. Okay, where are the courses? Because in the UK, I think, you know, it's kind of regulated psychology the same way as you might regulate engineering or something like that. And which basically means you need to be quite intellectual and fairly intelligent and capable of writing a 15,000 word dissertation on something or whatever. And which I would say is very valid if you're going to be building bridges or buildings, because obviously we don't want them to be falling down, and we want someone who is mathematically what's the word? Competent and you know, understands stress and all this kind of thing. But if the same principles seem to be applied a bit to psychology, when really what you need is someone who is more emotionally competent and more emotionally aware. And I think this is where medicine to a certain degree, and where therapy to a larger degree, has really got unstuck in the Western world, in that we are the people who might be good therapists, who are emotionally more competent, are not likely necessarily to come up high into the to get to a PhD level with psychology, with ClinPsych. It may be, you know, there's a kind of a slight exclusion that could be going on there somewhere, and I definitely perceive a gap. And so it has this kind of double effect where people who want to go and study something about the body, okay, you know, or emotional expression or something like this, you know, there's nowhere really legit that's kind of highly recognized really that they can go. You know, a tiny little bit in the UK, but it tends to be a bit wishy-washy. You know, I won't mention any schools' names. And likewise, you know, if you're looking for a therapist, you know, you're kind of going to this therapist and they're talking and you're talking, and you go this one and it's more talking, and it's like, this isn't quite doing it for me. Perhaps at some point, where do you actually turn to? You know, and this, it does seem a shame. Do you know more about why? I don't really know why. I know CBT came up in the 90s or so, but I don't really know why did this kind of bioenergetic approach go down, because it did seem like it was more. I mean, I'm the same age as you, actually, 60. But I mean, I don't know why it kind of decreased to the way that it did. Do you have insights about that, and how the IIBA, Lowen's organization, still a bit? I think you can still do trainings in Spain and Italy here in Europe, but there's very little else. Do you have insights about that in North America?
Well, I think two things. Lowen, like a lot of founders, was running bioenergetics as a movement out of his back pocket. And some of the people training with him wanted something more consistent or uniform. And so it was always imposed on him. And he didn't have, there were some difficulties there, right? And he wrote about, he wrote about the difficulties in his autobiography, as ghostwriter did. So when he stopped teaching, it was a stroke in the very last years, and he sort of stopped teaching, and then he passed. There was no heir apparent. There were many people who wanted to be an heir apparent, but there was no heir apparent. So there's a lot of, I think, just small spirit, and they couldn't open up to broad movement. But also, in the 50s and 60s, when, as he describes his work, because he was practicing in Manhattan and there was more socially trendy to get analysis or stuff like this, he had a full-time practice, but it was pretty, fairly small. It wasn't a movement in the 50s and 60s, but he was developing all his insights. He was working and trial and error working. And certainly he had locally, a well-known reputation, but it was a movement. But then I think with the idea of the late 60s and the 70s, and I think he wrote this himself, he thought it got misidentified as an anti-authority movement, because certainly you do question authority, even parental authority. So it sort of had this explosion of popularity as sort of, which really missed the boat. And so then I think there was a strong contraction after that. Of course, a lot of people had come in at that time, but I think as far as zeitgeist or something like that, it was always a hard sell, a road less traveled, except for people misunderstanding it. And that's when I think the encounter group came in, and the group work and that idea. So yeah, it's really, to establish a lineage, I don't think the Western movements do that very, very well, really. Reich officially appointed, Ellsworth Baker, and I think he has therefore some authority in his own time, but, ergonomists are very obscure. They didn't explode either. Of course, they were very restrictive, and you needed to be an MD for a while like that. But, I think they're just very restrictive, maybe that has to do with jealousy of followers. They want to, they want to be the carrier, the messenger or something like this, and nobody can agree upon it. So there's some contraction or some holding. So the indirect influence, I think, and I think where there is an abundance of the sensitivity towards this is not in talking therapists, or even talking therapists who call themselves somatic or body psychotherapists, but in actual body workers, massage therapists. I've met much more Pilates instructors, certain yoga instructors. I think it's for some people. I'm an idea person, and so I talk a lot, and it's easy to get me talking because I'm just interested in the ideas. And then some people are more an oral character, and they just talk because they love the voice and the vocalization. So most therapists are one or the other, and so you just get drawn into talk, and you get drawn into talk, and you get drawn into talk, and you get drawn into talk, and it's hard to do that. But if you go to massage, some people might talk through it and just chat through it and stuff like that. But the emotional responses, my experience is that there are many hands-on workers that are familiar with emotional response. Pilates, you can have an emotional response. Yoga, there's sort of a quietism built into many schools of yoga and stuff like that. But Tai Chi, Qigong, it's like with my clients, I work with them to develop like practices that aren't talking, and they can get so much more. But then you do need a piece that when the body changes, that there's some capacity for the ego to assent to it, to recognize what's happening. Oh, like, wow, that was a different type of conversation with my neighbor. God, what's happening there? Because otherwise you could panic and recontract, So, spontaneously, there are open things that happen that can open people, shocks, that can open people, but without any understanding of how to be consistent with those and put yourself, in the way of those consistently, there won't be some durable progressive development. So the role of the therapist is like, I think, I find my role is to put the larger context of progressive change but most of the body, most of the body work, and of course COVID has really cut into this too, is, I think actual body work. And that coming out of the 70s in the group work is the idea that the body work consists of blowing the top off. I a great colleague who discussed this many years ago, blowing the top off, and then the true pure self, the unsullied wild self, will come up and emerge if you blow the top off. And that may be true for certain types of characters, like the rigid character or the passive aggressive character, the passive feminine character, exactly. But I think for most characters, and certainly the schizoid or the creator character and the oral or the reaching or, communicator or whatever you want to call the first two characters, really there's been developmental arrest. The neuromuscular foundation of anger has not been reached at the time of the, schizoid character. So to tell them to blow the top off, and be angry, you might get some hysterical reaction, but do you get really satisfying self-building, type of anger? So more developmental approach. And I see clients like that, struggling from the first three characters, developmentally the first three characters, and maybe just the rest won't come to therapy or something like that. And it's really a developmental question, yeah. You're developing, and the premise I work with is that if you develop the capacity for this drives, then the drives will happen. If you change the body, then belief systems will change, interaction patterns will change. People might go through an adolescence, suddenly approaching people is just what they want to do. It's just they have an impulse to approach people. Maybe they need to learn the social skills, but if they don't have the impulse, trying, to like learn the social skills of approaching the opposite sex or whatever like that is not going to help if you don't have the real drive to sustain it.
Totally. I'm just, it's like kind of, it reminds me because I'm just kind of doing this part 2 of my bioenergetics book and series, which I'm calling bioenergetics, and which probably by many therapist standards will not be totally bioenergetic. But I talked a bit about drive. I mean, this book is about success, and it's about what, it's about understanding the first 3 characters a little bit, and that you have got this diminished drive. And it's kind of like these words are not, they don't even really apply into modern psychology a lot, things it's like, but it seems quite straightforward. If you don't have enough drive, and if you don't have a clear sense of boundaries, either you're not going to be able to move at all, or any energy you kind of create, like the oral character, will tend to just dissipate out, and you will struggle with depression habitually throughout your life. And yet, I mean, a lot of people who've been through a lot of psychotherapy sometimes come to me and they hear these things and they say, "Oh, wow, that's pretty straightforward." It's not as complicated as some of the stuff I've been trying to do. And I don't think that, treating the old character is a panacea for depression at all. But I've been struck recently, like in the last couple of years, by the depth of characterology, of character analysis, character structure. And like I originally did a workshop on it. I was in a workshop on it when I was doing therapist training, and that was like 15, 18 years ago. And we just had some of those pictures, which they've got these classical pictures from, I don't know if it's from Lowen's Language of the Body or something. I don't think so. It's from something around that era of 5 different characters and a bit of stuff. And it wasn't really very deep or revealing. It was kind of interesting. But as I started to read more about it a couple of years ago, and maybe you've heard of Stephen Kessler, his book, the 5 Personality Patterns or something like that. And just more and more research into this, I just realized, and then having clients and pointing them towards these resources, people got so many aha moments, you know. And in the West, we've kind of formulated various different ways of categorizing people. You know, you've got sort of Myers-Briggs for the more corporate kind of thing, or the Enneagram or something like this, or the chakras and bodily centers for the more new age minded, spiritual minded. But I think it's all good, but I mean, there's an immense kind of depth in character structure and understanding, particularly I think some of these patterns as survival strategies, which kind of, so to speak, come online at different phases of childhood and infancy. And, you know, it just strikes me things like this could really transform a lot of psychology potentially, you know, if it was a clear marketplace where people could just adopt things and do it. You know, I'm planning to write my own book on characterology next year after I finish this one, and just with the insights I've got, and with including more exercises and kind of pointing to the actual thing. And I want to try, I know a few people have tried to make like a characterology questionnaire where you fill in one of these things like Myers-Briggs, you know, you fill in 50 questions about how you'd be in this party or whatever. And at the end, it kind of comes out with some scores. But I think I don't know, it just strikes me there's so much potential, unused potential in characterology. And at the same time, you know, I think that the child rearing practices have changed quite a lot since, you know, character analysis certainly was originally published back in the 30s. And so I kind of see it a bit different from I mean, I haven't read Lowen anywhere near as extensively as yourself, but I have read The Language of the Body. I think it was called something else originally, but and he covers 4 of them quite well there, and rigid subtypes and stuff. But I think it's changed quite a bit. But at the same time, there's just a depth there, you know. I mean, what are your impressions about character structure and the value of it all? And
Yeah, I don't think there's any comparison to Myers-Briggs or the Enneagram or, you know, astrological signs or anything like that. One thing about Myers-Briggs is essentially the subject fills it out for themselves. So there's going to always be confounded with what you think you should be or what you think is cool to be, you know. And whereas I think the 5-person typology, which Reich and Lowen described, but I mean, these 5 characters have probably been in nature, you know, for 50,000 years or something like that, or 2,000 years or something like that. You know, they didn't invent this, they, you know, described it. It's a natural occurring phenomenon. And they developed a heuristic to sort of, you know, organize the observations. And so really it's meant for someone with a different set of eyes, and hopefully maybe a different character even, but a different set of eyes, to identify the character first, you know, because it is the definition of a big blind spot. Your character is almost by definition a big blind spot, so you can't really, you know, see it. And until you can really see your own character, you're not going to be able to accurately use the other 4, you know, because if you're a reacher character and you want to be the quarterback, you think you're the rigid. That's what almost like every newcomer to this information tends to think they are. Oh, I'm rigid. Oh, poor me, rigid. But you know, the oral. So if you think you're rigid, you know, so if you don't understand your own character, it's like a compass that's all screwy. You're not going to be able to like get other people character usefully. So that's why I think there's very few people who can accurately consistent, you know, like you get 2 expert raters together for inter-rater reliability and stuff like this. Actually, Bob Glazer, who was passed now, but he's in the Florida program, he did his PhD dissertation, I think, on an attempt to verify the 5 character type rating. But, you know, it was And his work wasn't very convincing and stuff like this, but I think it's, you know, until you really plumb your own character and have an idea. Um, so there's always going to be a lot of confusion, and Lone was clear. I'm not that character is the body. It's not a collection of traits. It is so tempting, and we're so psychologically minded that we want to talk at great length about the traits that are commonly associated with this body structure, and then know the character by the collection of traits. But that's not what it is. It's a body structure. So you look at the body and how energy moves, not necessarily the geometry, because the schizoid character can have some, it's not, that's another over reduction, I think, the idea of the what do you call it, the triangle, like, you know, the psychopathic character is an upside down triangle, you know, and, you know, you got the rectangle, you know, you got the wide rectangle for the, you know, masochist character, you know, you got the skinny rectangle. It's not always, that's a bit of an oversimplification. It's how the energy moves. It's how the energy flows and how the energy moves. And so I think the purpose of the character analysis of the traits is only this, and that is, well, if someone's not changing their body, character analysis is cruel. It's just like picking on the weaknesses, you know. So if there's no body work going on, there's no body change, and character analysis is really cruel. There's no real reason for it. If there is some body change going on and some impulse and anxiety emerging, I think the participant, the worker, the client will start to search for security in some ways, and that's still different. They'll undertake a different goal than they had before. But characterologically, it could be the same. Because of the Lowen said, resistance resides ultimately in the character. So if you analyze the ego, the consciousness and ego, sometimes you can get work there. And if you work the body, you're going to loosen up the body, and the characters the final refuge is the character, exactly what he means by that, because is it a structure, is it energy, is it a point of consciousness or whatever. But so at that point, when there's movement, and this is a minority of all people, because this is the road less traveled, right? Then maybe coming out with character, you know, and explaining, you know, character. So it's wonderful, you know, it's fascinating. It makes so many things fall into place. But I think it's something that needs to be, you know, for therapists, learn really, really, really well, then forget it, almost. And it's in the background there, you know.
I found, like, since I started reading about it and working a bit in that field, a lot of people seem to get easily engaged with it, you know. And I think, I mean, I see that in the 60 years I've been alive, society has changed a lot, actually, you know, in the UK, certainly. People are a lot more heart-centered than they were when I was growing up. That's my perception. You know, I have a way of monitoring it, and I do find people are intrigued by this stuff. Young people are quite intrigued by this stuff, certainly the ones that come to me. And I think there's a degree to which you can, you know, you will never be able to self-diagnose as well as someone. There will always be blind spots, as well as someone outside who really knows what he's doing or what she's doing. But I still think there's quite a lot that can be usefully understood. And it's like, it kind of hooks people in and gets them engaged and interested. You know, I don't know, I'm kind of looking for how can therapy kind of be reborn a bit in some way, you know, not that everything has to change, but something a bit new can come along in a way that can give people something, you know. I mean, to be honest, what really motivated me to write the first book on bioenergetics, and I'd written one book before, it was just a cheap kind of sex novel, really. But like, so I could write basically, but like, what motivated me was a basic concern that, this stuff is going to just die out, that it's actually, there's so few people really practicing it or knowing it, or even just basically explaining it, because I mean, I only read about 4 or 5 books of Lowen's, but I only saw one where he put a lot of exercises out and really started to go into it. And I also probably would have, if I'd been writing that, I'd have written it a bit differently. But I do feel that it's important somewhere to maintain these techniques in case we really do go into a very different situation in the globe, and it literally just dies out. I don't know if that's me being extreme or a way of justifying my own kind of creative output, but I mean, do you think it approaches a point somewhere where, or could approach a point where we just go totally, because just as I see the culture becoming in some ways more civilized, certainly a lot less violent in the UK than the times I was growing up, but that's also been kind of affected not through a massive rise of awareness. There is some more heart-centeredness, but by people also thinking much, much more about life. And, that kind of concerns me. Do we just go up into an even more kind of cerebral space? And if in some future generation people want to come back down, will there be anything around that can possibly guide them? I don't know. Do you ever wonder about things like this at all? Does it make sense what I'm saying?
Guided back into their body?
Well, it's like, when I started the channel off, and a lot of people in their 20s were interested, and just saying, I'm looking around for bioenergetics and body work. I feel instinctively this is something I want to do, but there's just nothing I can find or nothing near me, and I just kind of thought, well, what happens if another generation goes by? I'm 60 already, and it's like another generation goes by and there's no more therapists working with stuff like this. Will there be anyone around or any material around that can actually support people to come back?
Yeah, I don't think I really thought of that. I mean, Lowen's books, all 13 are in print. Reich's books, they're all in print. There is, Kessler's treatment of it, which comes from, a certain lineage. I mean, so Reich and Lowen influenced a lot of people who didn't just follow him. Those are probably great sources, didn't have all that transference problem with people following. So all the people that just were influenced by him and or influenced by their own observation. I think, technology is making it very hard for us to be in our body below our neck, like push button. Like if you live on the 3rd floor, of a building, 80 years ago, your relationship with where you lived and moving was how much energy you had to go up and down the stairs, and so, that physical energy to do work, as far as emotional energy to, have an impulse to do work. Now it's an elevator, and if you go 3 stories, well, you press 3, little movement with your finger. You go, 87 stories, little movement with your finger. We're divorced from, this technology, this push button technology, power steering, automatic transmission in a car. We're so much prepared foods, is, if you want to shed in your backyard, get your axe out, you order it from the big box store and it gets delivered, you can just assemble it or something like that. I think technology is really divorcing us from our body, just consumer, everything is being consumed or push button. And so it's like thinking about it, I think that really is uphill to work against that. So I think things are becoming more cerebral, generally, or the cerebral approach is being less challenged. And certainly, and like technology, like I work with many clients who are given a couple of years in a work group to like just fool around and try to invent some bit of code, some little app to do something. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter, because if it does work, it can be applied to billions of transactions. And it makes a billionth of a cent or a millionth of a cent or something like that, because it scales. So when you have like the internet and things like that scale so much and be so profitable, um, it's hard. Like, yeah, who wants to go to the store and talk to the shopkeeper? It's actually, clear on Amazon to order it. So, relationships, or, it's just, I think technology, um, comfort, getting out of our body, prosthetics, is making it hard to get embodied, so people have to go to the gym. And what do they do at the gym? Well, they lift weights, they pull themselves up because that's what their mind is telling them would be a really cool thing to make their body do.
Mm. Mm. I mean, I kind of, in a sense, I guess I hope that this kind of COVID, whole lockdown situation might even push things so to an extreme with this, that actually people realize we have to come back in the same way that, there's now so many people like in the health system in the UK, who are never really, there's no real treatment for their chronic fatigue, which they call long COVID or whatever, and there's no real treatment for their anxiety, their depression. There's nothing. They're just kind of shuffled around from one place to another. And possibly if that explodes to a certain point, which there's some signs in the UK, though they don't publish quite as many mental health metrics as they could do. But in the last year, maybe I kind of think, well, will it explode to such a point that somewhere people have to say, well, what could we possibly do that could work? Given that it's probably pretty clear that a lot of the more, certainly the level to which mental health issues have risen in the last year is being exacerbated by the isolation and the sense of isolation, that whether people are aware of it or not, they probably need more physical contact and more just basic social contact. And, will there be some kind of innate pushback or something, or an innate reaction that pulls things back? Or do we just keep going up and up into the mind and keep trying to find more mental strategies to deal with the fact of being cut off from the body and cut off from our feelings? I guess with COVID, my hope is somewhere, it sounds a bit black and something, that, things get so bad that people realize, hey, we need to do something a bit more radical about some of this stuff. People need connection. There's been a kind of, in the UK, we've had about 6 months of the last 12 on lockdown, basically. And it's all focused around protection of the self. Put as many barriers up as you can between other people, and then you're less likely to transmit the virus, which makes pretty good common sense. But of course, it ignores the rest of the needs that you might have as a body and also as your immune system. I don't know. I'm just riffing a little bit, but I don't know. I'm always hopeful somewhere that something will pull things back somehow, or there'll be some, movement back. I don't know. Well, what you relate to what I'm saying? I guess it must be quite bad in the US as well, with mental health in some areas, from the lockdowns and that, and the businesses and going bust and this kind of thing.
Yeah, well, it has been bad. I've seen it with my clients that, some have come back for a video appointment, and they're literally pulling their hair out, you know. It's like they show up, you know, and they're, you know, they're losing it. So obviously that happens. Of course, you can't be losing it like chronically, then your body goes in more long-term, you know, coping mechanism, which is more contraction. And I think there's going to be a lot of that. I hope there's a reaction, a conscious reaction, like, you know, choose life. That's why I was telling my, you know, spouse, because I have an isolative tendency. I have a being in my mind tendency. I have a risk adverse tendency. And, you know, I was struggling with, you know, going out into the world more, you know, penetrating the world more. When this happened, ironically, and it really, you know, taught me this lesson, is conscious lesson, you know, say yes to life more when it's possible to do that. And I even have this, like, I don't know if it's a musing or a fantasy or something, like, I wonder how people, like, in occupied territories, like in France, when there was liberation and stuff like this, you know, there was such depletion there, but at the same time, was there this conscious desire? Oh my God, you know, we got freedom. Let's not. I don't know, you know. So yeah, I hope there's a rebound and people understand, you know, the importance of it. But underneath that is, you know, that conditioning, which is below the cerebral cortex. Like, if you're out walking in your neighborhood and someone's coming at you from the same side of the street, well, the corrective behavior is like, go to the other side of the street. Like, almost like antisocial avoidant behavior, right? It's correct behavior. And it's because of the time, or you see their mask, or whatever. So we have all been receiving this body training below the level of consciousness to, you know, avoid and isolate, and view someone you don't know as dangerous, or that causes xenophobia or tribalism. I don't know what you would call that, but the view in your body, you know, you get your nervous system reaction. You know, someone you don't know is dangerous, even if they're, you know, on your block, walking in the street. So I think that will be something to overcome. You know, like, what is the counter conditioning? You know, what can we consciously, or as a society, you know, develop counter conditioning? Because you don't just drop that body conditioning at the drop of a hat. You know, the governor says, okay, don't need masks, you know, don't need social distancing, you know. Well, you think, okay, I'm going to go talk to the woman across the street, you know, but then when she comes close, you have a body reaction. But yeah, no, of course I'm hopeful and eager to begin. You know, it's like I say, I'm going to say yes to life. I hope I can honor that, more or less.
I think, you know, I mean, on a personal level, I'm resolved to more treasure connection. You know, when I've been starved of it for so long, and I do know a lot of people, so I haven't been totally starved. But I think it's also a personal challenge for me. I think to just really to own, hey, I really do cherish connection and having certain people in my life, and to you know, to live up to that. You know, to live up to that when it's appropriate. To be able to say to people, hey, I really missed you. I really care about you. You know, you really mean something to me. Our connection is important to me. I think this lockdown has put that more in the front of my mind now. You know, I can also go through the day on quite a not fully automaton style, but I'm kind of doing this and doing that, and I've got my little schedule and that, and sometimes I'm kind of caught up in that to a point where I miss the power in the moment, you know, to be with someone, you know, and how kind of mind stopping it can be in many ways. You know, I mean, it kind of reminds me, just like I still see, you know, I mean, we're going, like, we just, you know, into this very cerebral kind of world, and who knows, maybe even we integrate with machine intelligence, you know, and some Elon Musk and some of his experiments and whatever, or we end up getting run by AI in some kind of social credit system or whatever, I don't know. But there is also, for me, that a kind of tragedy if it moves in that direction, in that, you know, we do have such potential, you know, and so much energy inside, and such incredible potential. And it's like, it does just seem a bit crazy to me sometimes, just as we have this incredible potential, the level to which we are so easily manipulated, and or seemingly so easily manipulated and kind of controlled, you know, not necessarily in a super conspiratorial way or something, but it just seems so easy to manipulate humans often, you know, like, sometimes I read these conspiracy things, and there's a lot of people who go on about these vaccines, you know, and that they've got trackers inside them, and I just think, well, you don't need to do any of this, you know. I mean, we're just really easily manipulated a lot of the time, it seems to me, and it's like, it's kind of a tragedy somewhere, in that there is such depth of energy and emotion and presence and awareness inside everyone that's alive on the earth. And yet I just see that the vast overwhelming majority of those people it's very unlikely they will ever really manifest much of that, or even really come into contact with it in a certain way, you know. And what if we all end up in some kind of AI situation? It just seems a bit crazy somewhere. I don't know. I mean, just saying, but
Well,
you know,
technology is very seductive, even to a thoughtful, altruistic person, because it produces, you know, it addresses survival, you know, infectious disease, you know, like the messenger RNA vaccines and stuff like that. Technology, you know, wasn't there in 1919, Spanish flu or something like that, you know, so made a difference. Or, you know, industrial farming or whatever, you know, getting enough food calories. Of course, quality of food is another issue, but with technology is, because if you're not safe, you're probably not going to develop from your heart center very much. You know, you're not going to have a strong relationship if you're not safe. I don't know, maybe not. So safety seems a good. It seems like an emotional good, that sense of safety. But we go too far on it, you know, and get this push button thing. And, you know, AI that is probably, you know, artificial cranial intelligence, you know, because there's a lot of intelligence in the heart and the gut, and a lot of nervous tissue. As we point out, you know, you've got more nerve tissue in your gut than you do in your cranium. And you've got quite a bit in your heart as well, you know. And we have the traditional understanding that there's three centers of consciousness, and they should work balanced, you know, the brain, the heart, and the gut. And that's what a lot, I think, bioenergetics is really about, just that balance, just balancing. But it seems like the brain is really good at technology, or thinking in the way that would produce or envision technology. And that's really seductive. Like you said, you know, European colonizers, you know, they got whole continents because of being brain centric.
yeah, I guess it's something we're working out as a species somewhere, and we don't really know what's going to happen. I don't know. I mean, I just like, yeah. Wow, man. I don't know how long we've done. I'm just gonna have a look, actually. Well, it doesn't tell me anyway. But it's nice to chat to you. It's nice to just have a bit of a chat.
I've enjoyed it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do it again.
Yeah.
Do it more, maybe.
Yeah. It's nice. I think I did one with another guy like about a week or two ago, and he actually recorded that and then we put it up, and a lot of people appreciated that. I think it's nice just to have these interactions and to be able to record them so other people can, maybe something really, strikes them and something happens. It feels like a good thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I appreciate the opportunity because, just like I said, this is my growing edge. Getting out there in the world, invitation makes it easy.
Mm, mm, mm. Oh, okay, thank you. Yeah, yeah. I think it was because you commented on one of my streams or something, and I remembered your name. I think you had is it Reich and Lowen Therapy or something? Your
Yeah,
website.
ReichandLowenTherapy.org.
Mm, mm,
Yeah, that was my first attempt to understand everything and explain in a way so everybody can understand everything, as if we'd
mm,
all be all right if we understood everything. Now it's a little more nuanced, but yeah, I still keep that side up.
mm. When did you create that website?
Oh, 2008, 2009. It's when I was disillusioned with the group training and sort of a characteristic response, the group training. Of course, there was a lot of heart-centered stuff going on in the groups that I was missing. Maybe this was my way to, participate. But I was so excited. Yeah, just so excited by this information, and yeah, I do think it should be out there. Do think it should be out there. Maybe yeah, understanding character, understanding the five different characters really helps people get involved and see the legitimacy. And I think there's also a lot of room for work, or what I sometimes call pan character work. That you don't have to necessarily narrow down which character it is.
Mm, mm,
Just sort of like re-embodiment, choreography, energy, then then differences will emerge, but really get back to the body and don't argue endlessly. Am I in between character? I've got this masochistic traits, I got this oral traits.
mm,
Well, actually, on your feet, let's get on your feet and see what's happening. Move your
mm,
ankles around.
mm, mm,
you know what do you feel in the bottom of your feet? There's a lot of room, I think, for um, just general work, as people are so you know uh, disassociated from their body,
mm, mm.
or they use it like a mule or a shopping cart
Or
to
rubbish
carry the
heap.
brain around.
Or garbage dumpers. Quite often, I must admit, some people I see, and myself at times. Yeah. I mean, another thing I see just to continue a little bit, is what's kind of interesting is in a few of the kind of big influences around the therapy scene. There's a few people about, like Mark Walsh, who runs this thing, the Embodiment Conference, which has been huge in the last few years. And there's another guy, Alex Howard, who runs they're both Brits, a thing about fatigue and general and chronic fatigue and ME. And they're huge kind of influencers. They're like hubs, really, where a lot of people are coming in to get information. They're very based around like polyvagal theory, and it's and that's inspiring to see, and it's good stuff. But I also think it's inevitable. The same way as people work a lot with the mind and they get interested in the body, you can work a lot with this heart and the connection. But you still also need this kind of gut center as well. It's like that, the capacity to ground yourself and to stand up on the earth and to walk your talk, and this kind of thing. You have any opinion? You see anything similar in the world, or I've noticed it as like a kind of very heavily associated now with trauma. You need polyvagal theory, and I quite like it. It's like it's a good thing, but it's also, when I've read books on polyvagal, I'm like, well, this is good, and I've had benefit from these things, but it's also like half the story or something to me a bit. I don't know what are your feelings?
Reich and Lowen sort of were uh, certainly pointed to the autonomic nervous system, as a fundamental site or system of change. And they use sort of what is it, two-part understanding, sympathetic and parasympathetic. And there was something that didn't quite match up that way. And so a three-part understanding, I think really helped answer some questions about how the autonomic nervous system functions as a foundation for experience, perception, emotion. So I think actually I was very, very excited to read that when a colleague sent that to me. But then ultimately, I think the question is, what can we do to give ourselves a different experience that will lead to loving better and living better? So like character analysis. What about character analysis will lead us to do something different enough, mindful enough that we have a different experience and our life changes? So capacity to love is greater, a capacity to live fully is better. And the same with polyvagal. Porges really doesn't have an understanding any different from Reich and Lowen. Do you come up with any practices? Do any practices normally come out of that? Well, I'm not an expert at polyvagal community, but I think they did talk some about voice and hearing. But that's a rediscovery of what there was this French guy, Tomatis, and without the connection between the vocal cords in the ear and the heart, basically. So polyvagal, I think if you start talking autonomic nervous system and how trauma happens, then that's going to really help you explain it in a way that seems consistent with no internal contradictions. But what do you do differently? Well, you work on the facial nerves. Well, I think there's a little more emphasis on the face, which Reich and Lowen, of course, did, an ocular segment, an oral segment, and stuff like that. But thinking of the face. But yeah, I think there's so many of us that we're blind and we're touching an elephant. There's really not any new elephant in the room. It's just different people are touching it in different places.
Yeah, I guess with polyvagal, what I see a little bit from, it's a lot about the level of safety and connection. That's how I've kind of perceived it. But if you can create a space where someone who's been in quite a traumatic reaction to life can feel safe, and then they can start to communicate about what's happened, about their feelings, about how they're affected now, and this kind of thing. I was around there's a dance therapy out of South America, Argentina, called biodanza, and that was not created out of polyvagal theory, but it certainly matches a lot of its kind of intent as I see it personally, and then you create this very connected space where people really feel safe over a period of a number of hours or, weekends and things like this. And yeah, I think it's good. And also, there's the part where someone who suffered any level of invasion wounding also has to be able to hold safer boundaries, not simply use their mind to find a safe place and avoid everything else in a certain way, and that's a bit where the kind of grounding or belly side comes in, but it is not, because certainly with the community, the biodanza community, the aspects of it I knew, people would become complete, workshop kind of addicts in a sense, and love the intimacy and the closeness of those connections and the depth of those connections, but outside in the world weren't necessarily functional, just constantly needing that connection and the safety of being able to communicate things which before would have been very challenging. So I used to kind of rail against it a little bit, and then I realized that it was actually good for me, but it was just a little bit incomplete also.
It's, yeah, it's shifting the responsibility to the other. And I think a lot of just mainstream casual therapy is based on the idea of being just so accepting or loving. It's such a safe object that the client can reach out, because they're just so safe. It's irresistible.
Mm.
And Reich and Lowen were more drive oriented than they were object oriented, rather than, try to create, the perfect object that makes it safe, unlike your childhood. Restore the drive. And so then you'll pick a safe object. You'll be able to push away a dangerous object or a bad object, and you'll be able to pull towards you or interact or penetrate, a good object. So that was, the idea of anger and expansion, or arms and expansion. The love segment was the expansion. The responsibility is really on the client, because like you said, you can't change the world. There's going to be social friction. You have to negotiate the mix of object quality that's out there somehow. You have to do that. And I think that just the therapeutic community generally is a bunch of is mostly motivated by the idea, I'll give someone the love that I didn't get.
Mm.
So they want to be loving, they want to play loving or be really loving. And that gets in, polyvagal too, we're so safe that we teach people how they can feel when they're safe. And then they go around with safety culture or cancel culture or something like this. I need a trigger warning because I know it feels good to me, I think, if I'm never triggered. But of course, you're going to be, like you said, you're going to be really triggered. And it's not just a static idea of being safe. Life is pulsatile. So we move out and then we contract in and we move out. And that capacity to pulse is what's really about health. It's not beating at like the binal. So yeah, if you're really contracted. So in a session, you want to provide safety and help people develop safety in their routines in their home. But I think ultimately, you want us to be able to, have boundaries.
Mm. Totally. Yeah. Yeah, it's quite a big thing, this cancel culture, particularly in the States. We get a little bit over here, but yes, it is. I guess it's people saying, I don't feel safe, therefore the outside has to change, essentially. And in certain environments, I guess, because now there's so much social media and cerebral activity, then that becomes viable. Whereas maybe 20 years ago, no one, you could say, I don't feel safe. And the committee or gathering or whatever situation is, they just continue as normal without any concern. And somewhere all the unlistened to people have now got a potential to have a voice, and it's a big process starting. It's a big kind of journey for a lot of people. Being cancelled or talking about unsafety, it's an interesting dialogue. It's an interesting dialogue to have with people. I think it's like our culture is exploring these concepts somewhere of his safety, and I guess I have a belief that if you really get to a position of safety, then at some point now you want to, okay, what is being triggered? Okay, I want to be unsafe now. I mean, you don't really want to just live in cotton wool with no stimulation at all, just in a kind of, maybe a few people do, in a completely kind of cocoon of just nothing ever challenging you, like, I don't know, it's kind of good that we can have these kind of movements happening in society somehow. I think it's kind of, there is something valid to it. You know, a lot of people I know in my age group are super anti-cancel culture, and I find it challenging at times. But then I don't spend so much time on Twitter, and I'm not on Facebook at all, so I don't get it so much. And it's not. I think it's much stronger in the US, but I think it's also a very interesting social phenomena as well. You know?
Well, I mean, the logical endpoint is madness of a standard that says, you know, anything that makes anybody uncomfortable is wrong.
Well, also, and has to be stopped.
Yeah, you know, because, you know, there could always be somebody that's uncomfortable and, you know, actually uncomfortable from something, you know, because from something they hear because of their own traumatic history or idiosyncratic history. So, you know, there's got to be, you know, the whole different standard, you know, what's wrong. It can't be based on someone not liking it. You know,
Well, I think we're exploring that, aren't we? You know, I always look at these things and I kind of think cancel culture, people are, you know, raging about something and online, and I kind of think, oh my God, what would it be if like the whole world went like that? You know, that's how my brain seems to see it. It immediately puts it onto a global scale. But I also think it's kind of, it is just, it's elements and areas of a culture in transition. You know, it's symptomatic of that. And it raises things for me like, oh my God, I'll never be able to do anything which might ever make someone else uncomfortable. But that's not necessarily the reality. It's just a big issue that's going on right now in people, or certainly for some people.
well, I mean, they tried to cancel Reich.
Who?
They tried Reich.
Reich. Oh, right.
They tried to cancel Reich.
Well,
You know, they wrote articles that were so distorted saying he's dangerous and his ideas are dangerous and they're unsavory and your children should not be exposed to his ideas. And
well, they did kind of, I mean, the FDA kind of cancelled him in a way, I guess. But I mean, I don't know. And I never read, was it Myron Sharaf or something, wrote a big biography of Reich.
Fury or something, Fury on Earth
Fury
or
on
something
Earth.
like that.
Fury on Earth or something. A guy I know in New York has read virtually everything about Reich. I'll have to ask him. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's probably a whole new discussion, Reich. I don't really know. And I don't know, I'm not sure what time it is, or I'm not sure. Must be doing something else. We seem to be talking quite a long time, and it's cool, but maybe we could do another chat about Reich sometime, or at least start with that maybe. Yeah. And because it could be quite a big subject and all of that. So I'm kind of feeling just to sort of wrap it up for now and call this one a wrap. And thank you so much for chatting and being open and just having this discussion.
Well, thank you as well for initiating this discussion. It's great. I'd love to have another one. Oh, cool. Well, let's tentatively put. We'll hook up. I'll switch off the recording and we'll think of another time to do something. I think you can switch